The redemptive mission of God plays out in the world, which is that last phrase, because when Jesus had his meeting with Nick at night and they were coming up with a verse for NFL end zone, extra point efforts, and for Tim Tebow to have, and I'm messing, so Jesus suggests John 3:16, and Nick bought it. For God so loved the... Now, I grew up hearing that, but I translated it? Because, see, we shrink-wrapped what God was up to. We thought God's primary mission was building the church. Everything else was a sidebar. Instead of, once you understand that God's primary activity on earth is the kingdom, and we've been called to participate with him and that, partners with him, because that's where we're headed. And so I translated that, for God so loved the church that he gave his only begotten Son. Because that was, are you kidding? Now, I'll tell you what that does, of course. It turns the church into the destination. And here's where I want to kind of make some amplification and maybe application or some stuff for you to think about as a movement. See, if the church is the destination, we get the scorecard really confused. Now, by the way, I fly out of here today back through Atlanta, Georgia, Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson International Airport. And since I live in the southeast, of course, I go through there all the time. And I can tell you, typically about once a week, happened yesterday, Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson International Airport apparently thinks they're winning when all the planes are on the ground close to the hub and the concourse is full of people. That apparently is their scorecard, and they were nailing it yesterday. Now, you know what's really happening when that's happening. You've got a bunch of people whose lives are screwed up. They're not getting where they want to go because airports aren't intended to be destinations. Now, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? I mean, just ask those poor suckers that got, maybe some of you got stuck in Europe, when that Icelandic volcano was belching for a couple of weeks. I mean, nobody came back from those trips with a coffee table book, great airports of the world. We're going to see them all. It was great. 3 days there, man. We're planning a return visit. You want to go with us? Are you kidding? That's the trip to hell, to be stuck in an airport, because an airport's not supposed to be. Now, you expect them to have running water and food and be nice while you're there and all that, but that's not the point. You're trying to get... Let me tell you, the church is supposed to be a connector, like an airport, but life is the destination. And when we shrink wrap it down to, just what we celebrate is church-centric activity, church programming. I'll give you an example. And then maybe I'll talk about implications. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Because once we understand that our major impact is supposed to be in the world, it opens up a wide array and a much broader spectrum of ways that we can be people of blessing and celebrate it and strategize around it. I was talking to a group of clients in Dallas that come together from 10 different cities around the country, and I was sharing with them, if our job is to bless the world, and that's the covenant, and we are the people of God as we are that, then why don't we figure out what blesses the world in key ways? And I said, I gave them an example. I said, for instance, we know that if a kid gets out of elementary school without reading at a beginning fourth grade, in the third grade, beginning fourth grade, right in there, if a kid can't read at that level, every life health indicator for that kid heads south. They're not going to test well. They're not going to graduate probably. They're going to be ripe for drugs, for gangs, for, prison. When I made that point, the lady in the back of the room said, I live in Florida, Miami. She said, I serve on the governor's commission for something or other. I can't remember. She said, but we actually calculate the number of prison beds we're going to need in the Florida correctional system based on fourth grade retention. That's how serious that number is. Now, if we know that, if that is true, what are we thinking? What are we doing? We're having more church stuff? Why does any kid get out of elementary school in the town where you live or the city where you live when our churches are full of people who can read? What are we thinking? Fiddling around while Rome is on fire. Shouldn't somehow our metrics, what we celebrate, what we strategize around as the people of God, somehow ought to raise that and attack that, which is an incomprehensible result from all of the billions we spend in education. Now, one of the congregations there, by the way, got that, went back, began to strategize. There are about 4 things that go into a kid's ability to read. And one of them is being food challenged. If their stomach's louder than the teacher, or if they have what percentage of kids in the community where you come from are on reduced lunch or free lunch? You ought to know that number, because that's how many kids are food challenged. And those kids do not go home to sumptuous feasts on Friday afternoon. We've been feeding them all week at school. And if their brains aren't getting protein, if they're not, this is why. Anyway, so one of the congregations, it made a decision. We can't fix all of the areas that impact a kid's ability to read, but we can take care of that one. And so, like many of you now, they started a backpack program where they're up to 1,000 backpacks a week, 6,000 pounds of food every single week. A congregation that numbers less than 500. This is not a big old honking deal, but hundreds of people now. In fact, it has so taken their town that it's spilled out of the church. And when I was there to celebrate this past February with all of these folks that were part of that effort, over 400 volunteers in that little community of about 20,000 people, what I was looking at was the church. From every tribe, everything from Pentecostals to liturgy, mainline to liturgists to Baptists that don't know what they're. So every possible, and they were all celebrating the fact that in 2 years now, test scores have gone up in every school where the backpack program is. Every school, that's right. This is real life. Every school where the backpack program is, trips to the school nurse are down. Attendance is up, as you can imagine, on Friday especially, and on Monday, because that's when they take those backpacks home filled with food that these kids can open up all weekend long, not have to cook. Now, that's a different way of celebrating abundant. This gives a kid a chance. What if Jesus loves kids? I know it's kind of a wild assumption, but what if they really matter? In fact, I was talking to a teacher about 3 weeks ago. She's first-year teacher of middle school and teaches history, middle schoolers. And a friend of ours, we were in their home and having dinner with them, and she came in and started talking about one of her kids. And she just started crying. See, she's first year. She's not crusted over. First year in this, no teacher left standing system that we've got now. And it's apparently a scorecard. And she's talked about one of her students that was suspended that day for bringing a gun to school. Now, your immediate reaction is, well, yeah, we don't need guns in school. You know what? Her heart is broken. She says, I know it. He is a good kid. She said, he had no father. Nobody's spoken into his life. He does a dumb thing like that. And we have just sentenced him today, probably to prison. And she's completely broken because she can't do anything about it. We talked a little bit about ways to maybe get with him or some crazy. There's no way he's going to make himself available for that kind of stuff. What I'm saying is, if we can rescue these kids or talk about Josh. Josh, coffee with him about 2 months ago. 28-year-old young professional talking with me about his ministry in the poorest part of our city. And he goes in there every day now. As soon as work, he's mentoring kids. He's got, in fact, they've actually gotten to the point now, he says, after a year and parents begin to into an apartment complex where there have been 3 murders, where gangs and here's this white guy going in there. It took a year for them to understand, to trust him and what he was doing. And now he's actually started a Sunday school on Sunday nights in the apartment complex. I mean, it's just this great story of one guy who is suddenly captured by God's heart for people who don't have a chance. And they're never going to come to your church service, I don't care what you do. You can change the color of your smoke. You can serve really great coffee. Get a sexy sax player. They aren't coming.